اللي بيموتش من الطيران يعني بيموت من الجوع.
تم استهداف عن طريق طيارة استطلاع مباشرة. القذيفة طبت في الأرض ووجد الشظايا كلهم، فأبو عمر مباشرة استشهد.
كيف المعنويات عندكم هلا في شمال قطاع غزة يعني؟
في حالات احنا بنقدرش نتحمل نشوفها مثلا، ولا المصور برضه مثلا يصورها، لانه حاله بكون ابو زينه هيكل عظمي. في انه اغطي، اقسم بالله العظيم من قلبي اغطي الشمال باكمله، وانا بتمنى من اهل الخير انه يدعموني ويقفوا بجانبي. الجو زي النار. احنا اصعب شغل عندنا ترتيب الطناجر، توليع النار في الجو الشوب. يعني احنا يوميا زي هيك يعني تجهيزات ساعتين. بعدين عندنا 7 طناجر، احنا 8 طناجر يوميا طبيخ. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. عندنا طبيخ بازيلا مع جزر صلصه، عندنا طبيخ عدس، شيء مرتب. بدفعني استاذي انه من الحالات اللي بنشوفها يعني ام تصيح تقول لك والله ما في شيء طعم اولادي، لما بيجيك يتيم بقول لك والله ما عندي انا ام تحط لي والله.
بس أنا بدي أقول لك إن أنا كثير يعني قديش في مأساة عندنا لما أشوف الصور اللي بتبعتوها أنتم، تدخل نوع من الابتسامة اللحظية.
الاطفال احنا اللي مشجعنا ومشجع الشباب معايا، انه الاطفال لما بحملوا صينيه الرز ولا بحملوا المعكرونه، وتحس انه الولد سبحان الله نفسيته اتغيرت وانبسط.
في مؤسسات كثيرة ما قدرت تعمل الشغل اللي بيعمله شيخ محمود. يعني أول شيء بدي أشكرك وحييك وحيي الشباب المغامرين معك اللي بيروحوا يجيبوا تحت القصف.
فضل الله وفضل الله وفضلكم ابو زينه وفضل المتبرعين.
Hussein said he would burn the entire country of Israel.
Okay.
Assad, Hamas. Okay. You know what? Even members of Israeli Knesset,
it's very clear.
Arab countries.
Danny, I'll ask again. We've gone off on a lovely diversion, which you're the master of. How many nuclear weapons does Israel have?
I don't know. By the way, another diversion, which I have to say.
No.
I have to
You can't pre-announce your diversions. Let me ask again. If an Iranian guest came on my show and I asked him about Iran's nuclear program, he said, I don't know, I'm not going to talk about it. Would you be okay with that? You'd be outraged.
Of course.
And yet you sit here as a former minister of the Israeli government saying, I don't know, never talked about nukes with anyone.
Because there was like 16 United Nations Security Council resolutions against Iran.
And there is against Israel. And there is against Israel as well.
About
your nuclear program?
No.
Yes, there is. UN Resolution 487. Let me read it to you. The UN Security Council in 1981 says, calls upon Israel urgently to place its nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA. Why haven't you done that?
Because
the Netanyahu government doesn't care about imposing a cruel apartheid regime on the Palestinian population. It dismisses the costs of both sides for defending the settlements while fighting the Palestinian freedom fighter that Israel calls terrorists. In a sense, what is taking place now in the occupied territories and in part of Gaza is a second Nakba. A Palestinian state must be established. And the only way to achieve this, I think, is to apply sanctions against Israel, against the leaders who oppose it, and against the settlers.
Well, first of all, this morning's images, it's like we're watching Auschwitz on TikTok, you know. Had there been YouTube and Instagram and TikTok around Auschwitz, this is what we would have seen. People burning alive. And it's beyond horrendous. It's beyond comprehension. And as to your statement about you thought that it would end at some point, actually it's the other way around. When people like this are empowered and encouraged and allowed and supported and perpetrating their horrors, they get more crazy, they get more cruel, they get more remorseless, more relentless, more ruthless. That's what happened to the Nazis. The Nazis did not start off with gas chambers, you know, but then they started killing their mentally ill people in gas vans. Then they started shooting Jews in Eastern Europe. And then they ended up with the gas chambers of Auschwitz. So it's a progression of madness and cruelty that's almost inevitable on the part of the perpetrator. And especially when it's encouraged by all the imperial powers. If people don't look at their own history, why would they look at horrors elsewhere? So that in the West, there's been this denial. You know, if you walk through Trafalgar Square or Westminster Abbey in London, you see all these monuments to these mass murderers who killed thousands and tens of thousands of people in India, in Africa, and elsewhere in Asia. You know, so the present horrors fit into a long history of Western colonialism and Western mass murder of indigenous peoples. And
you said it. Oh, sorry.
One final comment on the statism. All you have to do is to watch the TikTok videos of Israeli soldiers dancing and laughing and chortling and dressing themselves in the clothes of Palestinians and mocking the Palestinians and making humor out of blowing up homes. I mean, it's sadism of the worst sort. And they don't even hide it. They put it on TikTok. The Western press doesn't reproduce these images, but anybody can watch them. They become sadists. All these other Israelis, they'll tell you about the propaganda and the brainwashing that happens almost right from birth. So that the sense of superiority and entitlement and fear and loathing of the Arabs is just brainwashed into them right from the beginning. It's like a cult. And
it works.
And it works really beautifully. And then, of course, Palestinian resistance doesn't always take beautiful forms. I mean, the Palestinians have done some terrible things. You know, the suicide bombings, the killing of civilians. Now, why people are driven to that despair, that's another question. But from the Israeli point of view, this just validates and justifies what they've always been taught. You know? And October the 7th, the killings of civilians, the abduction of people and all that, to the Israelis, this just justifies everything they've ever been told about the Palestinians. And what they did to create the Palestinians, they didn't consider that for a second. But I also think it's traumatizing to grow up in an environment like that. It's traumatizing to grow up in an environment where you're always told that you're always under threat. And that fear and loathing of the other is like the essential value. It's traumatizing to grow up like that. What does that do to you as a person? You know, not to mention, there's a lot of historical trauma in the parents and the parents of the parents of Israelis that they brought from Europe. And those traumatic imprints are passed on as well, quite apart from the Palestinian-Israeli struggle. There's just trauma that's passed on from generations. So you get this historical brainwashing and this immersion into a cult-like sense of superiority and loathing of the other, coupled with historical trauma passed on from generations, and you get people capable of doing what they're doing now.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper. All of the disasters I've seen combined, 40 mission trips, 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all of that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage that I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza.
And when you say civilians, is it mostly children?
Almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my entire life combined. I've seen more shredded children, missing body parts, being crushed by buildings, the greatest majority, or bomb explosions, the next greatest majority. We've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds, and then there's sniper bullets. I have children that were shot twice.
Wait, you're saying that children in Gaza are being shot by snipers?
Definitively. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately, and directly on the side of the head in the same child. No toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best sniper.
The Democratic Party exists to make sure good people do nothing. The reason I criticize the Democrats so much can be explained in the aphorism, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The Democratic Party exists to ensure that good people will do nothing. Gaza is such a perfect example of this. When Instagram progressive Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez promulgates the blatant lie that Kamala Harris is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, the result is that people who trust AOC will relax and stop pushing for an end to the genocide. They have been told by the congresswoman who's been marketed as standing as far to the left as anyone can reasonably be that the current administration can be trusted to take care of this thing, so all they need to do to save Gaza is vote for the vice president in November. It isn't necessary to impose such manipulations upon Republicans who simply support Israel's atrocities in Gaza because they believe Muslims should be exterminated, and because Israel is going to fulfill a biblical prophecy that will bring back Jesus and send all the heathens to burn in hell. Such manipulations are only necessary to politically nullify the kinds of people who would otherwise see what's happening in Gaza and move mountains to end this mass atrocity. So many of the world's problems wouldn't exist if the Democratic Party simply was what it pretends to be. If it really did stand against the sickest impulses of the Republican Party, if it really did stand for peace and justice and equality and ordinary working people, things would be unrecognizably different, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. Because good people would be doing something instead of nothing, evil would not triumph. The Democratic Party exists to prevent this from happening. Instead of a good faction standing against an evil faction, the world's most powerful and influential government instead has 2 evil factions working together toward the advancement of evil agendas. But what makes it so destructive is that it's not just 2 openly evil factions. It's one openly evil faction and another faction which pretends to stand with good people against the evil faction. If it was 2 openly evil factions, good people would immediately recognize that their goals are not being represented by either party, and a real revolutionary movement would emerge. What makes the Democratic Party such an effective psyop is that it stops good people from recognizing that everyone with power and influence in their country is their enemy, and it stops them from responding accordingly. For 10.5 months, American progressives have been mollified into a state of paralysis with empty words about a ceasefire and a 2-state solution by a political party that has never had any real intention of bringing about either of these things. The Biden administration has been just as guilty in Israel's genocidal atrocities as the Netanyahu regime itself, but by paying lip service to humanitarian concerns and pretending to be working toward peace while regularly leaking stories to the press about how angry and stern Biden is with Netanyahu, they've been able to wash their hands of their guilt in the eyes of many. That has been the single defining feature of this presidential race. Not electing the first female president, not stopping Trump, not saving American democracy, whatever the hell that means. The single defining feature of this presidential race has been one of America's 2 mainstream factions claiming to want peace and justice for Palestinians while supporting an administration that has been butchering them in a horrifying genocide. That's the effect of the Democratic Party, and it's been doing this since long before October 7th. Obama made a whole political legacy out of weaving tapestries of flowery prose, expressing deep compassion and a love of peace and justice, while spending 8 years continuing and expanding all the most depraved and murderous policies of his predecessor. Biden gave liberals throughout the Western world a sigh of relief when he took office, because at long last the adults are back in the room. And now he's waging a steadily escalating proxy war against a nuclear superpower while backing an actual genocide. An empire whose existence depends on endless violence, oppression, and exploitation at home and abroad cannot afford to have a major political party which stands against those things. So it doesn't. And because it doesn't, while pretending that it does, it is able to relegate objections to this tyranny to the fringes of political discourse. So I criticize the Democrats more than the Republicans because they require more criticism. That Republicans are evil is obvious at a glance to anyone with a conscience. That Democrats are evil is much less obvious, and usually requires quite a bit more consciousness and commentary to understand. The empire has weaponized the insight that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. So spreading awareness of the reality that the Democrats are not good people and are not doing good things helps take away that weapon. Evil will continue to triumph as long as good people continue to do nothing. And good people will continue to do nothing as long as they believe their values and desires are represented by a political party whose sole purpose is to ensure the triumph of evil. Shattering that belief is an absolutely essential step toward a healthy world. This should be a major goal of good people everywhere.
I grew up in a very political home. It was the 1960s where politics was permeating. I can't say I'm nearly as confident of the truth. I think truth is a process that you have to struggle with. Ugliness, an ugly, ugly underside, which started to come out in Israel's last assault on Gaza, when they started to post on the web the videos of their enthusiasm as they destroyed Palestinian homes, as they humiliated and degraded Palestinian women and Palestinian men.
Let me preface these remarks with I never, ever believe Israeli figures. I've been in the government too long to know that the Israelis are patent liars. In their intelligence community, in their propaganda community, certainly, and in their leadership, they are inveterate liars. Let me say that again. They are liars. So you can't believe anything that comes out of Jerusalem. It's all propaganda.
Majda Wasila School in Al-Nasr neighborhood to the west of Gaza City, where the Israeli warplanes have targeted this shelter school, which is sheltering thousands of Palestinians who have been forcibly displaced from the areas of Beit Lahia, Jabal refugee camp, and Beit Hanun. As you can see here, the blood of the killed Palestinians. At least 4 Palestinians have been killed and dozens have been injured and transported to Al-Ahli hospital. We can clearly smell the smell of the blood all over the place. We can see the burned mattresses that these displaced civilians used to sleep on. As you can see, the bed covers, the belongings of the displaced civilians here.
We were in the queue to fetch water, and suddenly there was a huge explosion that shook the entire area. After the dust settled, we found innocent people who were killed and injured. Those who were killed and injured were neighbors and relatives. We communicated with the ambulance service and the civil defense, but they arrived late. This place is a shelter for 2,000 or 3,000 displaced people. The majority are from the north, where we were forced to evacuate by the occupation, who told us that this place, namely Western Gaza, was safe. We moved to Western Gaza, but they followed us to Western Gaza.
The scale of the destruction inflicted on these closed classrooms due to this Israeli attacks, as you can see, the whole resulted from the missile which hit this shelter school. It came from the roof to this ground of this classroom.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
We understand that this Israeli strike happened in the early hours of the morning. A number of missiles hit this road. Now, this is the road between the Lebanese Al-Masna crossing and the Syrian crossing. And what happens is that people, generally those that can afford it, have cars or vans, and they drive up this road over to the Syrian side. Now, this crater is so large that no vehicle is getting through. Now, what people are having to do is stop on one side, carry their luggage and their belongings around this huge crater. And as you can probably see, there are people crossing right now, having to traverse around this huge crater that spans to the length of this road. And if I can get our cameraman Jamil to show you the other side towards the Syrian side as people cross, some people have vehicles waiting on the other side, others don't, and they're going to have to walk that distance. So that kind of escape from Lebanon, from that conflict, from the Israeli bombardment, has got so much more difficult now with this bombing. Now, Israel had accused Hezbollah of using this road to transport weapons into Lebanon. Now, the Lebanese authorities had a press conference on Thursday saying that this border crossing was under the authority of the Lebanese state, essentially denying those claims. But this border is around 400 kilometers long, the border between Lebanon and Syria. So it is a vast border, but the question is, what is Israel aiming to do? This can surely be repaired. But essentially, you have Israeli troops in the south of Lebanon trying to invade. They've threatened aircraft, Syrian and Iranian, or any hostile aircraft that they deem hostile, from landing in Beirut. All but one airline, I believe, is still running. And now they've hit this major border crossing that the Lebanese authorities have said over the last 10 days, 300,000 people have crossed into Syria, mainly Syrian refugees. And they've basically cut off this lifeline.
Breaking news coming out of Syria right now. Just minutes after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime, Israel is now invading into southern Syria. IDF tanks are now entering the Quneitra province of Syria from the Golan Heights. The Israeli army radio is stating that all agricultural areas adjacent to the Syrian border are now declared closed military zones. Israel War Room is also stating IDF begins an operation to fortify the buffer zone along its border with Syria. There's no way I'm the only person here who had alarm bells going off telling me something fishy was going on when the day Israel and Hezbollah had a ceasefire, the rebels invaded Aleppo. I refuse to believe the Israeli Mossad, arguably one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, did not have prior intel on the rebels' planned invasion. Now Israel is stealing more Syrian land and branding it as creating a buffer zone. I will even go insofar to argue that Israel knew and planned this months ago. This article was written a couple weeks ago now on November 22nd. Is Israel expanding territorial control towards Syria? Article talks about how the Associated Press reported on November 11th that Israel was building along the Alpha Line. The Alpha Line is the Syrian edge of the Golan Heights before you enter a demilitarized zone and then Syria. Israel was building along this zone a month ago. Israeli troops were laying down asphalt for a new road, violating the United Nations ceasefire agreement of that area. I refuse to believe that Israel's just coincidentally building roads and developing the buffer zone just a month prior to their now new expansion of the buffer zone. There is so much evidence to support that Israel had intel or supported the rebels' invasion of Aleppo the day of the ceasefire agreement in order to eventually overthrow the Assad government and expand beyond the Golan Heights. Over the next year, especially into Trump's presidency, there is a high likelihood that Israel is going to continue to expand this so-called buffer zone.
(972) interviewed acting members of the military. The reason that AI was being used, basically, according to those Israeli sources, is that they wanted a tempo of attacks that was faster than could be humanly sustained. How does the AI decide who is killable? It will look at everything that can be scraped about you, from surveillance, from spying, from your social media profile, from who your phone is near when you're walking around, who you're meeting, and they'll give you a number. And if your number out of 100 is above a certain threshold, then you can be attacked and killed. Where are you attacked and killed? Well, there's another AI called Where's Daddy? And according to this reporting in 972, again, based on what Israeli military officials told these journalists, it's easier to kill somebody when they're home than it is when they're out in the street. So this AI will monitor the location of your cell phone, your smartphone, and when it arrives at the location that's been determined to be your residence, then there will be a ping to the guy who can target your house and bring it down. I guess whoever came up with this name, Where's Daddy, thought that many of them would be fathers. And that's why it's called Where's Daddy. When they reach their homes, Daddy's home, and then the entire house and everybody in it could be blown up.
So many times when I went after a bombing that just happened, I literally felt like I was standing over a mass grave, but not just a grave of people who are dead, but people who are alive and they're stuck there.
اللي بكون في داخل البيت ما بيسمع شيء ولا بحس في أي شغلة. طبعا احنا موجودين في البيت وأنا على الدرج طالع أنا وزوجتي وابن أخي أمامي. تم قصف البيت علينا ب3 صواريخ فنزل البيت فينا. أنا لما نصحيت من الصدمة ومن الضرب صرت أنادي على أولادي تحت، هم ينادوا علي، عرفت حالي إنه الحمد لله أنا بخير، زوجتي ماسكة في إيدها. لكن رحمة ربنا إنه إحنا دخلنا بين طبقتين من الدرج وسحبونا بين بيناتهم.